Welcome to the Sage Family Podcast,
where we explore natural homeschooling, gentle parenting,
simple living, and family adventure.
I'm Rachel Rainbolt, the Sage Parenting Coach, coming to you from the Pacific Northwest, where I live wild and free in connection with my 3 wildlings and the Papa Bear in our fixer-upper on the beach. This is episode 62, and today I'm here with Eden Hyder talking about attachment. Eden is a licensed therapist and founder of the Inside Out Collaborative that offers therapy, counseling, and coaching services. She also hosts the Inside Out podcast that covers topics about relationships, family dynamics, and more. So join us around the campfire and let's get living the family life of our dreams. Jump on that Apple Podcast app, open Sage Family, scroll to the bottom, and write a review. These podcast reviews are a quick, easy, and free way for you to support this show and the mission of making the world a better place through peaceful parenting. Lake Ruby writes, highly recommend. Rachel's words and interviews add so much peace and hope to my day. I am always inspired when I listen and find myself jotting down notes. If you have kids, you will benefit from this podcast. Thank you, Lake Ruby, and thank you to everyone else who has given the Sage Family Podcast its 5-star rating. Our adventure of the week was my kids' first sailing regatta. It was a whole weekend spent lounging on a sunny dock, eating snacks, chatting with new friends, and watching all the boats sail around on the water. Next time we plan to bring our kayaks so we can try and get even closer to the action and have fun while we're doing it. I am so grateful that Bay fell in love with this sport for a myriad of reasons, but particularly for the quality of the spectating experience. If you want to see photos and videos of this regatta or any of our other adventures, then head on over to sage.family on Instagram and follow along. Welcome to the show, Eden. Will you introduce yourself and share a bit about who you are and what you're passionate about?
Yes, so I'm Eden Hyder. I currently live in Dallas, Texas, but we are venturing out and up to Charlotte, North Carolina very soon. Really excited to head up there and expand my therapeutic reach into the North Carolinians. But yeah, I'm a therapist. I'm a mom. I am a wife. I'm a daughter. And I think a lot of my passion for the work that I do and how I see living a life that is meaningful and purposeful and joyful, all of that comes out of my own work, right, in my own life, and an attachment, and looking at attachment and relationships is a really core thing to how I view the world.
Yes, I can relate on so many levels. It's funny because when I first started this podcast, one of the topics that I wanted to cover right away was attachment. And I just had not found the right person to share that conversation with, because it's a topic that's so important to me. Like I really wanted to just wait until I found the right person. So then when I found your work, I was like, 3 years into the podcast, it's finally time.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Have that conversation. So let's start at the beginning. What is attachment theory?
Well, it's basically a way of understanding ourselves. It answers the question of who we are, what we do, and what motivates us. And the main premise behind that is that we need people at our core. We need people. And that need from birth and from childhood shapes who we are, how we relate to others, and how we see the world. So I define attachment as this: I bond to you because of a need. And that need is safety. And what creates safety is me knowing that you will meet my needs. And we develop a secure attachment when those needs are consistently met. And we develop an insecure attachment when those needs are inconsistently met or not met at all. Now, around 50% of people are insecurely attached. And research has shown that those people are actually more vulnerable to issues throughout their life: persistent mental health issues, chronic relationship issues, dissatisfaction in work, bullying, poor self-esteem, etc. So obviously this is something that I see a lot in my work. And I think for a lot of people, it's unconscious. They don't know that that's there influencing who they are and how they are in the world. And so I'm really passionate about highlighting this. And I've seen a lot of freedom come from that.
Well said. So you mentioned like being securely attached, being insecurely attached. What are all the different attachment styles?
So the first division is secure and insecure, like I said. And then from that, researchers broke the insecure attachment styles into three different patterns that they saw through their research. And the other three, so it's secure is the secure attachment. And then there's an insecure anxious attachment. There's an insecure avoidant attachment, and an insecure disorganized or fearful attachment. And the secure attachment, kind of my quick reference words for those are confident. So the secure individual is confident. The anxiously attached individual is controlling. The avoidant attached individual is controlled, internalizing that stress. And the disorganized, fearful, attached person is chaotic. That's the feel they have.
I love the way you characterize them all. I feel like these are the kinds of like magazine quizzes that I wish were around like when I was a teenager, you know, like instead of like, what's my color? This is way more insightful.
What's my attachment? Yes. Yeah, totally.
Yes. Okay. So let's talk about like that inner child work. How can we bring our own childhood experiences into consciousness and parent our inner child?
So yeah, I talk about, and maybe your listeners probably have some idea of kind of what we're talking about when you say inner child.
Yes.
For me, when I'm thinking about that in relationship to attachment, you know, we have a multitude of voices that are kind of going on in our head at any one point. And one of those voices, one of those selves, is this inner child. And some of my clients will laugh at me when I bring it up, and then they have to like regain their composure and then engage in the moment more seriously. But it's kind of a weird thing to talk about. But there's kind of this wounded kid, right? Wounded kiddo that's stuck inside of us, and that child comes from these moments in our early childhood where we felt really misunderstood, where we felt really hurt, really in pain, really insecure, really scared. That there's a profound moment of pain that this inner child experiences. And part of the work that comes out of this attachment work that I do is kind of attuning to your own inner child. So we talk about attunement with your own kiddos, your actual physical kiddos in front of you, but it's about doing the same thing with yourself. And some people may not have that modeled for them. So it might be really hard to know what I mean by that. And that's probably when, you know, you might say it'd be a good a good idea to get a therapist, because that therapist can kind of model what it looks like to show kindness, to show grace, to show care to that inner child. Because often what we do to that kiddo inside of us is dismiss them, beat them up, talk really mean to them, because they kind of hold all of our embarrassment. They hold all of our shame
and all of our needs.
Totally. Yes. So what I'll do with the people I work with is I'll tell them, like, imagine your inner child sitting on the side of a street or on the curb, just kind of hunched over, pretty down. Are you gonna kick the kid in the leg? Are you gonna splash water on them? Or are you gonna go sit down next to them, put your arm around them and say, what's up? What's going on? I'm here. Like, tell me your thoughts. Let me into your world. So that's part of this idea of talking to your inner child. Now, finding that inner child, some of us, it might be really hard to even know what that child's experience was growing up. And so, there's lots of ways to stir that stuff up: talking to a therapist, asking your parents questions about your childhood, looking at old photos, journaling different stories. And the idea is that you're really trying to understand what it was like for that little version of you in those moments. It's not a rational process, and our adult brains will try to take that over, right? Minimize, rationalize, justify us out of our genuine experiences as a kid. And I hear that all the time. Yeah, it was really hurtful, but my parents had a lot going on and they did their best, and I was a lot of work. Sure, that all may be true to you now as an adult, but as a child, you may have felt completely crushed in that moment. And there was no one there to hear that, pat you on the back, say it makes sense, and just give you a moment, And that's kind of what I want people to be able to do with their own inner child.
Yeah, I will often invite someone to, like, pull up, like you said, pull up those pictures from their childhood. Or, like, if someone likes to draw, like, I'll have them, like, draw them like a self-portrait, at the age of the photo, like, that resonates with it, just to, like, get to know that inner child better. And one of my, like, favorite exercises that I find really helpful in, like, kind of cracking this work open is to write a letter to your parent that you'll never send, like, explaining what you needed in this moment, like in this picture.
Yeah.
Just pull any picture. It doesn't even matter what, like, just what was it that you needed in this exact moment? Like, write a letter, from this little girl to that parent who was there with you or who wasn't there with you and you needed with you. And I completely agree with what you said about the value of working with a therapist and doing some of this work too, just to have somebody to say, like, I hear you, I believe you. Those needs make perfect sense. Like, how, just to, like, validate in a way that we as, like, gentle parents work really hard to do with our kids, but often we were not given that, that same gift. So to have somebody else kind of model that for you to get things started so that you can then start to work on shifting your relationship with yourself, like shifting your relationship with your inner child. And another thing that can be helpful sometimes too is I'll say, like, well, what would you say to your child in this situation? Like, if they acted out in that way, or if they had that need, or if, like, would you tell them they're being needy and to cut it out? Or,
right. I love that one. Yes. You turn it around. Yeah.
Yeah. What would you say to your child if they were doing that? Or what would you say, like, to a really good friend who you respect and are really fond of, if they came to you and shared these feelings or these needs or these experiences? What would you say? How, like, literally what words? Like, I want you to say them out loud. And now let's imagine you saying those words to yourself in your own mind. Like, as this thought comes up, I'm not telling you to do it yet. Like, let's just pretend. It's so tragic and sad that it's so hard for us to be compassionate with ourselves, particularly because, like, in my world of gentle parenting, where I work with these, like, love warriors who are just, their level of compassion is remarkable for others.
Mm-hmm.
And it's extending that to ourselves is typically kind of the last level of development of that compassion.
Yeah. And I think it's important to connect that passion to the wound, right? Because
Yes.
these individuals who are so passionate about loving their kids in a compassionate and gentle way, most likely didn't have that themselves. And so that passion comes out of their own need. And so for them to really fully be able to offer that to their kiddos to the last drop means that they have to turn around, look in the mirror, right? And be able to offer that compassion and believe that they are worthy of that compassion themselves.
Yes. Yes. I think like my ideal would be that to my kids, like it's not like the whole gentle parenting thing is not a passion, like it's just the norm. It just feels
Mm-hmm.
like this is just normal to like treat other human beings in this way. Whereas for so many of us who are like the first to, the first generation to try and like,
Yeah.
Interrupt those cycles of intergenerational trauma and all that, like it feels so radical, and like it has to be a passion in order to like summit that mountain.
Totally. Yeah. And it really can feel like a mountain.
Yeah.
Because what's happened is that and even climbing a mountain without the right tools, right? Which is probably where, their relationship with you and their work with you can feel so valuable, because we as partners to people who are trying to climb this mountain, we can help offer and develop and nurture tools, to get there and do the hard work, so that their children, when they are in their own moment, right, of learning about themselves and growing past their obstacles, that they maybe have a little bit more than we had.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I've found too along the journey that when you're growing up in a system like a family system, if you don't know anything different, it can feel somewhat crazy making. I find too with like a lot of clients, there's a lot of like stuffing down of feeling like you said in the beginning about like, no, they did the best they could, all of that kind of stuff. And it's really been through parenting my own children that like there's been a lot of grief. Like every time like I feel that wave of like grief come up, it's like my inner child like taking a moment to grieve, like, oh, like this is how it could have been. Like I had no idea. I knew that there was a hurt, that there was a wound, but now I understand why. Like I understand where that's coming from. I see what could have been and what should have been, and what I'm like hardwired to thrive under, like what conditions. And that's like in our homeschooling lifestyle and in so many areas.
Yeah.
Just my in making the choices I've made with my own children and in the way that we choose to live, every time that sort of that like a wave of grief comes up, I try to like give myself a little bit of time to just be fully present in it and feel it, and to like learn from it and to get the validation from it. And then when I do that, it really helps me to be able to kind of integrate that new like sense of knowing and then move forward.
I love that too, because I think there is a lot of grief that comes up when you're in a role where you almost see yourself, right? You almost see yourself in the child that's in front of you. And like you said, you see what could have been possible. And it's almost like, sitting next to that kiddo on the curb and crying with them, right? Like, you deserved more. You did,
My
and
inner
giving
child's
them that
like,
space.
no fair.
I love that. I should have had that too. Yeah, there's anger, there's grief, and I have a lot of clients that express the same wave that comes over them and I think some of them dismiss it as like, well, this is just me being selfish, right?
Yeah.
Like, me being too egocentric, and it's like, no, actually that's grief, that's sadness, that's self-respect, speaking up, right? Like, I deserved this. I have value and I have worth. And yeah.
Yes. And if we are, through our self-care and mindfulness and, all the different things that I talk about on this podcast a lot, if we are in a place where we can allow ourselves, give ourselves permission and the support we need to feel those feelings and integrate those experiences as they happen, it can be so much healthier than when we feel that kind of trying to avoid it or trying to like stuff it down or shaming ourselves for it. And then it just sort of builds up and then explodes in these inopportune moments. So just hopefully all the listeners can hear me just kind of extending the invitation, like normalizing that.
Yeah.
And then B, like extending the invitation to have those moments and feel those feelings and allow those experiences to really integrate on a deep level. And I also wanted to add to that important piece that you said about defending our parents almost, or I would even describe it as like adopting and accepting the narrative that like your family system or your family of origin had and told to you about the story of like who you are and the life that you live.
Yeah.
That both can be true. Like, I want to invite everybody into that space of like both and like, yes. And
that is really hard to do.
Yeah.
It's really hard to say both and, right? Like, I can have my own reality and my own experience as a child. And there can also be this systemically appropriated narrative that also is true on many levels, right? There's kind of a personal truth and a system truth that merge, but we have to be able to see them both. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about forming secure attachments. Yeah. Let's say we're giving birth tomorrow. What is the recipe?
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
What is the recipe for nurturing a secure attachment with our little one right from the start?
Well, it's a loaded question, right? Because I think probably some listeners just leaned into their speakers right now thinking, oh yes, this is it. This is the juicy part. This is how I guarantee that my child will be okay and will survive me and life. And unfortunately, it's not that blanket, not that clear. But I will say that there are a few things that come to mind. One, I think we've talked a little bit about already, which is knowing yourself and giving and being accepting of your own limitations. Knowing where you struggle, what your strengths are. Parenthood is not a one size fits all. Neither are our children. So going into that relationship with your child with permission for it to look really different for you than it has maybe for others. Knowing those red flags, signs that you're not doing well, knowing your inner child wounds so that when they come up, you can identify them rather than reacting out of them, and building in plenty of support and self-care. So that's kind of my number one is know yourself and accept yourself. To focus on the 5 core needs. And those are kind of 5 core needs that I've broken down in my podcast. And for me, those are safety, security, comfort, relief, and validation. So if it's hard to think about all the things that need to be done in the house, the dishes, the laundry, the diapers, the groceries, with your kiddo, thinking about those 5 core things. How can I provide and offer safety? How can I provide a secure and stable environment for them? Consistency. How can I offer comfort to them? How do they receive comfort and relief? And how can I go about validating the feelings that they express? And number 3 is attunement, which is a lot about paying attention to those core needs and offering a response to those needs when they come up that that involve a level of self-awareness and awareness of your child. I mean, as a mom, you take your kiddo home, and I remember getting my kiddo in my arms, and I'm in that wheelchair, and they're like walking me out of the hospital, and I'm thinking, you're going to let me take it with me? Like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, this is like, I don't know what to do with this child. And there's a level of like, oh my goodness, there's no handbook. I don't know what a cry means. I don't know what that sound or grunt means. So learning that and giving yourself the time and space to learn those cues. And yeah, I think those first, going into it, knowing, just knowing and expecting that the first 2 to 3 years of life, investing really, a really focused amount of time and attention and emotional energy in those 2 to 3 years of life can pay off down the line. I think that can be like the dark period for parents, where they lose their sense of self. They lose their sense of, if they're coupled, they lose the sense of their relationship. It changes too much. They're blindsided by how parenthood actually feels versus what they expected to feel. There's a lot that can hit you in those 2 to 3 years of life. So surrounding yourself with community and people that can keep that perspective for you when it's really hard to hold on to that in the moment.
Yeah. I think the thing that made the early season most challenging for me with my first was the discrepancy between like the expectations and demands of society, like all the shoulds and the should nots, even the ones that like all the narratives about what it is to be a good mother, to be a good parent. And then what the actual like connection, attachment, bond, attunement, true needs of these like two human beings who are getting to know each other and learning to be in connection with each other. So the work for me in the beginning was to be able to tell the difference between the two, and to be able to let go of all of those shoulds and should nots and all the societal expectations and narratives that were not mine to carry, and to just fully surrender to the connection with this new human being. And like you said, it really is an investment. And I saw it that way. And now that my kids are older, like I really feel like I'm cashing in on all of the dividends of those early years of centering the connection, like in every interaction, sort of having this filter of, is this going to enhance the connection or take away from it? It can be that simple, like in every moment, in choosing how to respond and trying to show up sensitively and consistently, and responding to their needs. Is this going to enhance, or is this going to detract? Is this going to take away? Is this going to bring us closer? Is this a step, farther away? Just sort of keeping that filter in my mind, I found to be so helpful. So just letting go of all the crap that doesn't matter and surrendering to the heart of all of the stuff that does.
Yeah. And I think that inner child work, right? Like when we get triggered in that really kind of primitive place, we are losing access. I talk about this on my podcast, but we have this prefrontal cortex that's developed in our brain. It's the front part of our brain, and it's responsible for critical thinking, decision-making, empathy. It's responsible for you being able to ask that question, is this going to enhance the connection, or is it going to take away from it? When we get triggered by that inner child stuff, we can lose access to that prefrontal cortex. And then it's just two kids going at it, right? Your actual child and your inner child, and whose needs get prioritized there, and really probably neither get met when that happens. But I think that's where, if we can learn how to stay grounded and learn our own cues as parents, for when we're about to lose that part of our brain. And we can maybe tag team out with someone in our support system or a partner. That's also a way to really protect the connection, protect the attachment. Because you're saying, I'm going to tag out because I'm feeling myself getting overwhelmed, and I'm going to go take care of myself for a minute, and then I'm going to come back, and that quote unquote self-care might be throwing ice at your house. It might be checking a book across the backyard. It might be punching or screaming into a pillow, right? Like these are not graceful moments. these are moments where we need to get out the anguish and overwhelm that we feel in a safe way so that we can go back to our kiddo and preserve and protect that secure attachment.
I think that part of the best work that I did early on and that I still carry forward today is finding, like, if you picture needs as a Venn diagram, and anybody who listens to this podcast knows I talk about this a lot. There's like your child's needs and your needs, and where they overlap, you want to live in the middle. And I found that when they were young, like that was sort of the challenge, the mission to keep doing the work, to find that middle, to find that space. For example, when my kids were babies, they needed my body a lot, but they didn't need my brain a lot. And my like mental health was much better when I was engaging like intellectually with the world outside of my house. So I would wear my babies everywhere and nurse on cue and co-sleep and all that jazz. And I was also writing books and giving guest lectures in college classrooms and just doing all those kinds of things that helped me. So again, like my little one had their needs met, which was essentially my body, my loving touch and my smiles and whatnot. But then my brain could be fully engaged in the things that helped me to feel fulfilled. Whereas leaving my little one to go do something didn't feel good for me and didn't feel good for my baby. So again, just like finding that overlap. Cause like if I was just in the house, in loungewear 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I don't do well.
Yeah.
That's excluding my needs. That's like fully in the child needs circle portion of the Venn diagram. So finding that overlap, I find, and still like that's still work that I do now. I have 3 kids. I have a husband. My aging father lives with us. I run a business. I mean, there's a lot of like needs in my world, and consistently doing that work of like, anytime I feel out of balance, like going back to that Venn diagram and finding the middle is something that I find helpful.
I love that. I want to see this Venn diagram. I think it could be helpful. Yeah. I also think that's a perfect example of how individualized parenthood has to be. When I was pregnant, I didn't know if I would want to work. I didn't know if I would want to stay home. I didn't know how I would be the best parent.
Yeah.
And until I had my oldest and got a sense of what home life was like, and then saw my own restlessness with that more intellectual part of me and wanting to build something outside of, that relationship outside of the home. And I think there's a constant wrestling and reassessing of, okay, where are we on this Venn diagram? Have I shifted too far to one side or the other side? And then I also think it's a good example of how our child's attachment needs shift, right? Like that their access to us changes from a very physical proximity, right? They have to be close to us, on us, around us, all the time, to more just being available, right? They're in the playground playing, but you're not holding their hand. They can climb, they can run. And then as a teen, to more sense of psychological safety and I'm here if you need me, right? When you need me. And then into an adult where we are choosing and creating and nurturing our own meaningful, safe relationships based on these internalized experiences of safety, of our needs getting met.
Yeah. And I think it can be helpful too. I know, like when I started off parenting, I was in trying to determine what the needs were, I would sort of default to what I needed. There was this meme going around for a while that was like, be the parent you needed as a child. And I was like, ooh, on the one hand, like that is a very important step for like empathy and imagining the perspective of another and all of that. But then you have to evolve beyond that, like to be the child, to be the parent that your child needs, because your child's needs are different than yours. So like if I ever wasn't sure, I could fall back and use my perspective to help inform my action or my response. But also I'm always kind of trying to attune to this very unique and different human being and trying to understand what their need is in the moment, which isn't always necessarily what I needed.
Yeah. And I think, so I've talked about in my podcast that I identify more as an anxiously attached person. And my husband does more of an avoidant attached person. So we come really differently towards parenting and towards our own kiddos and towards emotions. And so we've had to do some negotiating with each other and kind of really doing our own work around, okay, is this me reacting out of my own anxiety and my own stress? Or is this me actually seeing Rue, my youngest, or seeing Nora, my oldest, seeing them for what they need and what they, what's going to help them in the moment? Because I think as an anxiously attached person, I struggle with boundaries, right? Maintaining really clear and set boundaries. And my oldest really didn't need me to work on that part of myself. Right. My youngest certainly does. She needs me to work on that part. So, that's something that I'm constantly looking at. I don't, with my oldest, I could be more of the parent that I wanted to have myself. With my youngest, I really needed to see the value of what my husband's much better at and what my parents did more themselves, which may have, as a child myself, may have felt too harsh, may have felt too strict. But for my youngest, actually, it's really helpful.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about rupture and repair. It's a good time talking about possibly being too harsh. So since
That's right.
that last question I said, let's say we're giving birth tomorrow. Oh, one more thing I did want to say about that too is that, and by the way, like I have these like loose questions, but we've been talking back and forth on this question for a ton of time, and I love it because it's all just stuff that's popping in my head. But one more thing I wanted to say about that too is that in that early season, it's often about kind of putting the cart before the horse in terms of caretaking behaviors. So as humans, we kind of go in the order that like we feel the feeling and then we take the action based on the feeling. And in those early years of parenting, we often have to kind of reverse it because we don't necessarily fall in love with this baby the moment they're born. I had that experience and a lot of people do, but not everybody does. Like, I don't even know if I'd go so far as to say that the majority of people do. This little human could be like screaming at you for hours a day and pooping on you and you not have the feeling like you want to put them on your chest all day long. So just sometimes we have to kind of flip that and just put the cart before the horse and engage in the behaviors that then foster those feelings and help those feelings to grow. Sometimes it can just be helpful to think about reversing those because it kind of goes against the natural order that we tend to move through the world with.
Yeah. And that just goes back to kind of know yourself and accept your limitations. If you're not feeling connected to this child, that's okay, but letting yourself feel the grief, maybe that what you expected wasn't happening, or it's harder than you thought it would be, or that your child isn't sleeping by themselves, and sleep is the one thing that you need to really be your best self. Like we have our own limitations, and again, it's something that we can't necessarily plan how it's going to feel. Something I'll tell my clients is fake it till you make it sometimes.
Yes.
Right? Like
Yes.
I hate it, but it also helps,
Yeah. Pretend to be the mother you want to be. I will
yeah.
tell clients that. Yeah. Like what would a good mother do in this moment? Like quote unquote,
Yeah.
right? Like what would it,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
there isn't a good mother, but let's like just in your
Yeah.
imagination, if you could imagine, and sometimes that might be like a projected idea of me, right? Because they're coming to me because they think I'm a good mother. And so like, okay, what
Yeah.
if you were me, what would I do in this moment if I was standing there in the yard with your kid and they fell down and your hands were full or whatever, like
Yep. Yep.
let's just pretend that you were the good mother that you want to be. Like, then what would you do if you were that person already? So that like fake it till you make it. I love that. I find that so helpful. Even now, sometimes I still do that. I
Oh,
imagine
sure.
like if I'm the future, like more evolved version of myself, like Rachel 10 years from now, what would she do in this moment?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I love that.
Okay. So since most of us are not starting fresh tomorrow, what can rupture attachment and how can we repair it?
So you already brought up this idea of like the good mom, right? And something that I latched onto in my master's program was this concept of a good enough parent, because it was kind of like, oh, I can be good enough. I'm not going to be good, and I'm not going to be great, and I'm not going to be perfect, but I can certainly be good enough. I think I can do that. But it is this idea that we are human beings. We are not perfect, and we live in an imperfect world. And so these moments of not meeting our child's needs within reason and within a tolerable amount, that can actually facilitate resiliency in our children. They're able to kind of learn from those experiences of distress tolerance in an appropriate way, right? And in a safe relationship. And then there's actually an opportunity there for us to model repair. We can teach our children that they're loved unconditionally, that they have inherent value, self-worth, self-respect. When we come to them as a parent, as a person in power, and say, hey, I don't think I did this great. And I'm sorry. And taking responsibility for our part of hurting them, right? And of playing into whatever happened in the moment in the rupture. And then also asking for their input. What do you think we can do next time if this happens again? How can I help? What could I do differently? Did it feel good when I did this before? Or, like asking their input, I think also nurtures in them this sense that they have an inner wisdom that only they have, right? And you respect that and respect their voice and want to hear them out. Without those moments of repair and speaking to our own accountability as parents, our children can internalize self-hate, shame, poor self-esteem, a need for perfectionism, right? That love is conditional. And so I think these moments of rupture and repair, like I'm so grateful that it can be such a helpful thing if we can do it well.
Yes, I completely agree. I love the authenticity of, if you're feeling out of alignment with your parenting values, to give yourself a minute to, get out of your amygdala and back into your prefrontal cortex, and then come back and repair, right? Repair the harm. And that collaboration step is so important and so good for repairing that attachment. And like you said, getting, really empowering that inner wisdom that your child might have, like asking for their input. One thing that I'll add is that sometimes we can find ourselves making the same mistake over and over again. And when that happens, I find that it tends to be because someone is trying to make too much progress too fast. Like they're trying to be someone they don't quite yet have the skills to be. And so they're falling short every time. And what I find really helpful in those moments is to try to take a smaller bite. Like, so rather than saying like, I'm just not going to yell ever again.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Try to focus on doing just one small part of it differently. So like when I'm about to yell, I'm going to take one breath and then I can still yell. Like, you know, like just sort of like lowering the bar for success to just doing one part of like breaking it down from like one step of don't yell, which is just huge. Break it down into like 5 small steps. Like first would be to take a breath, you know? And, you know, and then there can be other steps that follow, but just to break it down into a much smaller step to start with, and something that you can, that is hard and is uncomfortable, but you can follow through on, because then your kids too will get to see that follow through. And this is the same kind of thing that we want to help them with, right? Like we wouldn't tell a 2-year-old or a 3, like we would never tell a 3-year-old, like, don't hit ever again, and have that honest expectation, right? Like for the rest of your life, if you hit again, you're a failure. I mean, we would never, like, of course not, because of who they are and where they are in their brain development and based on their way of being and all these different factors. Like, of course, that's too steep of a mountain for them to be able to climb right now. But what you can do is give them like one small step between like the trigger and the reaction that they can learn to use and to utilize, and we can help them with that one thing, and in showing up and engaging in that one small step every time, like then it just becomes habit and it becomes norm, and then you can build up from there and then add like the next thing. And so it's the same kind of work that we hope to help our children with, and we can move through that same sort of scaffolded process with ourselves.
Yeah. And what you're doing in that is you're building a language and a culture in your family where, hey, we can talk about these things. We're going to help each other. And we're going to be honest about when we feel like we've failed or made a mistake. And I noticed that, you know, a little example, you know, I know this now because I reflected on it because of feedback from my kiddos, but I know now that I get really cranky when my allergies are really bad or when I'm really tired. And I had to kind of start backwards with that. I would notice that I would start yelling faster, or I would get really reactive, or I'd get really mad at my girls. And they would give me feedback about that. And then I would have to reflect on that and think, okay, why is this happening? And I noticed this happens. There's a pattern of this happening when my allergies are bad or when I'm tired. And so what I'm going to try to do is let my girls know when that's going on for me and ask them for a little extra patience and help. So say, okay, guys, I know that I'm probably getting really cranky, and that's because my allergies are really bad. And so I really need help with you guys listening right now. And so it's empowering them with, oh, okay, I know where mom's at right now. And I know how I can help. And so then what I saw, I would start saying that to the girls. And then I saw my youngest, who has a lot of emotional reactivity. I saw my youngest starting to say, I feel cranky. And I feel cranky because I didn't sleep well last night, or because someone in school hurt my feeling. Like she would start to say these things, and I'm just like, like I've explosions going on in my head of like, this is amazing. Because even that is very different than I am cranky, or I am this bad child because my mom keeps reacting to me like this. It's, oh no, I'm having a cranky day. I'm having cranky feelings, and there's reasons for that. And now I know how to get help for myself, or how to talk about it. And it's okay. There's no shame. You know, there's such a value in building language around our own limitations.
Yeah, gosh, I love like giving them the tools in their language of being able, like language really does create reality. So if you have the right tools, the right words, it can help to shape your experience of yourself and the world. And like when my kids were really little and I would say, oh, I'm noticing that your fists are getting clenched. And I'm wondering if you're feeling really frustrated trying to make this tower stand up. How can I help? Like saying that when they're 2. And now like my teenagers, will come to me and say like, you seem abnormally like impatient today. Is everything okay? Is there something, how can I help? How can I help make your day a little bit easier? Like they will literally say that. And I directly see that connection from when they were 2 and trying to build that block tower. And now they can extend that to me regularly. Like it's just, they just have that set in their mind. We sort of construct this framework of human connection. We get to have a hand in constructing that and building that in our family system. And so to my kids, that's just how humans relate to each other. And it always kind of makes me smile a little bit because, the way I was raised, like that was, planet.
You wouldn't talk about this thing.
God,
if you see mom being impatient, you will not approach her, right? Like,
no. Yeah. So it's wonderful and sort of speaks to that we talked about earlier about like investing. And like, it really, even if it feels hard at first, and especially if it feels really unnatural for you, because it did for me too, like all of this language that I use in this way of being that feels so core and natural and central to who I am. I had to learn that. Like I had to say these words over and over and respond in this different way over and over. And now that is who I am. So it does get easier and it really is worth it.
Yeah. And I do think in the moment you wonder, is this going to help? What is this really going to do for the relationship? Maybe you're not sure about how you're handling it or what you're doing. But I do think, I've experienced this and it sounds like you've experienced this. There are moments where you see, oh man, this totally connects back to what I did in that moment or in that time period or that stage of life. And again, it's all these connections of, wow, I'm so glad I did that. I'm so glad I trusted myself in the moment enough to go ahead and try this, even though there were questions.
Yes. And I have intellectually, I don't have the expectation that I create these humans. Like they really do come into the world with their own ways of being, their own personalities, their own given spirits, whatever like language resonates with you. I really do believe that. So it's not like I believe, I input A and B and then at the other end I get C. But what the research shows like that we do get to do is paint that picture of what healthy attachment looks and feels like. And then that becomes their baseline, their expectation, their norm that they do carry with them throughout the rest of their lives.
Yeah. And when I say like that secure attachment comes out as confidence, I think even in a small way, the example we talked about with language, being able to talk about our limitations and our imperfections and our failures and our mistakes, that's a culture of confidence. I can talk about this. I'm not afraid versus a culture of fear, right? Which maybe sounds that like you and I could have grown up more along in that culture.
Yes.
But there's a culture of fear of you do not approach, of shame. And so that's a little bit of the difference that you see in those attachment styles and how they, what type of culture they grow and build.
Yeah. And even sometimes like when you are parenting this way and just being in connection with other humans this way, you will see more of those imperfections in each other because you're safe to be your full, authentic, messy, imperfect self. So, whereas I very much looked like the perfect child when I was growing up, but like that wasn't really me, so like my parents could have and probably did walk around sort of feeling very proud of themselves, saying this way works.
Yeah.
What's your definition of works?
Sure.
So I might be sitting on the floor of a grocery store while my toddler is writhing on the floor, and I'm gently resting my hand on their back while they scream. That to me is more successful, than the littler version of me, like who would have never done that. So I just want to add that little bit of that I want my kids to feel so safe in our connection that they can be wildly imperfect along this journey of becoming who they're meant to be.
Yeah, I love that. Yes, 100%.
Okay, what does it look like to center attachment beyond the early years and into childhood and into adolescence? So I know we talked about this a little bit, but this attachment perspective, I feel like it gets a lot of attention in the early years, like attachment parenting, Dr. Sears, all that sort of stuff. Like it's something that's on the forefront of people's minds when the kids are younger. And then what I see often happen is that like then the kids go off to school at 5, and then it's no longer a part of the conversation. And I firmly believe that, that it should be a central part of the conversation all the way through the parenting journey and then throughout life. Like you talk a lot about it in terms of the partnership relationship too. So what does it look like to keep attachment as to keep centering attachment all the way through?
So, I have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old. So I would love to hear, and I'm sure you'll chime in with what it's like to have a teen, right? And how that feels and looks like as a mom to a teenager. But yes, and part of what we talked about was that attachment needs and our roles as attachment figures shift, because the idea is that this relationship early on, right, where they need our body, that builds this inner resource for them of my needs getting met, of safety, of connection, and that
feeling nurtured.
Yep. And that feeling, right, becomes internalized. So they don't need our body as much anymore, right? They're climbing along the playground. They're going off to school, but they do need our availability, right? They still need our continued attunement. They still might need us to say, hey, babe, you're a little softer. You're a little quieter today than normal, right? Maybe they don't have their fists tightened up, but maybe you notice small shifts in them. And for us to be able to reflect that back to them and ask them questions about it. I think as teenagers, what I've seen in my work with families is that anxiously attached parents tend to over control, kind of the helicopter parent. They try to manage their own anxiety about the world and about their kiddo's safety or themselves as a parent by over controlling the environment and their children. And so oftentimes I'm telling those parents to step back, to hold back from asking the swirl of questions about life or questioning their child's competency. Because I think what happens for the child in those moments is it reinforces this feeling of I'm incompetent. I can't handle what's in front of me. The world is a scary place. I can't trust myself. And that's obviously not what we want our teenagers to carry around with them. And then as an avoidantly attached parent, they tend to want their kiddos to be independent prematurely. So they may leave too much distance between themselves and their teenager, thinking, oh, well, you're driving now, so you don't need me anymore. You're fine. I don't have to worry about you as much. And so with those parents, I'm giving them little homework of spend time connecting with your kiddo. You don't have to be talking about all the deep things in life. In fact, your child may not want to, right? Unless it's at their choice and in their own time. But having things that you connect on or do together or do as a family, those moments of of time, giving your focused attention and your focused presence, that builds an internal resource for the child that, oh yeah, this person is here and available to me, and they care about what I'm doing. And maybe I'll think about talking to them or bringing them into some of the distress in my life when that moment comes up.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that the teen years in particular get a really bad rap because that is where control-based parenting fails. Quite frankly,
Exactly.
like once they start
Yeah.
individuating, if you have based your whole relationship on this power dynamic that's rooted in control and manipulation, then it just breaks down by the time they're adolescents. And then if you don't have, if that connection is broken, then there is no like secure connection lying beneath it. So I love what you said about essentially remaining fluent in the language of your child as they continue to grow. And I know that most of the people listening to this podcast are homeschoolers. And so we don't have that big like school divide where we're sort of existing in different worlds for, the bulk of our days. And that certainly helps. But remaining fluent in the language of your child, dedicating a significant amount of time and energy and resources to sharing in joy together, like doing the things your kids love to do. Like, for example, in our family, when it's your birthday, you get to pick a birthday experience. And really, it can be anything like, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? How long should we be there? And God, I love that. I mean, there are like 5 of us. So that's like 5 big things throughout the year, right? That we get to do that are just fully centered around like this person and their joy, and like what they love. And we all get to just like honor that and support that. And then, I mean, we just kind of doing that in a million smaller ways, like throughout the everyday. So I think the other big piece, particularly as they get older, is that I view my role kind of as ally. The verb parenting, the mainstream iteration of that tends to be very steeped in control, and the power balance tends to be really, really skewed of like, I know best and I say this and you do, I say X, you say Y, you do Y. And if we can, like I have a recent episode, the self-driven child episode, which I think is a great one to go back and listen to if you're if this is the space you're really thinking about and pondering on, but sort of just taking the role and the position in your child's life as that of ally. I'm here. Our home is a safe harbor. How can I help? I'm noticing X, Y, and Z. And when the connection is a two-way street and it doesn't just go like, the feedback doesn't just go one direction, then that does carry through. Like as they get older, they will, if you have shown them that you are honestly open to what they have to say, and you believe that what they have to say has value, that gets even stronger as they get older, because they're just even more in touch with their voice. If they can share their experiences with you and their thoughts and their concerns without fear of rules, being invoked or punishments being doled out, if they see you as an ally, then you really get to walk alongside them for the journey, which is wonderful. I mean, I genuinely enjoy being with my people, and that's not the stereotypical story, that I often see like on social media and whatnot.
I love that. I love the idea of that kind of transition from this idea that we have of what a parent looks like and how they interact with children, to ally, as our children are kind of collecting all of these experiences and thoughts and forming thoughts. Obviously that starts really, really early and immediately almost, but I think, being able to see them as their own person and someone who is very capable of working out their problems most of the time, right? But just needs someone to listen. And it's funny, it reminds me of a session I had with a family. I work a lot with teens that have eating disorders, and you know, and I see family work as a crucial part of that, because you really have to build the connection and the communication between the parents and the child, or rebuild it, if you will. And I remember, you know, I had the client talking a little bit about how they have been grateful for the eating disorder and how it's functioned for them, and how they've used it to cope with things that have been really hard. And that's felt really helpful. And I could just see mom, you know, bouncing in her seat, ready to say, oh, but it's not a great choice, and it's not a good coping skill. And you know that, right? And are you choosing other things? Well, and not even judging, but so scared that her daughter will get stuck there and choose it, when I know, and I think ultimately she knew that, like, her daughter's very capable of knowing the other side of that argument, right?
Yeah.
But to give space to this side of the argument, and for mom to tolerate, have her own distress tolerance around, I need to hear what this has been for my daughter, because that's part of her experience. And I also need to trust that she is wise, she is smart, she is capable, she is competent, and she can think.
Yes.
You know.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. If from the beginning we are focused on trying to understand our kids' needs and honor them in whatever, you know, form that takes in any particular moment, as our kids get older, they are so skilled at knowing what their needs are, which is huge. Like, I feel like that puts you so far ahead of the pack. Like, I know so many adults who have no idea what their needs are. So like the other day, my teen just like flopped on the bed and was like, my whole world is over. I'm like, oh, that sounds so big. Like, how can I help? You know? And she's like, can I just like talk it all out with you? Just talk it out. I'm like, sure. So in that moment, it's like, oh, she just needs me to like kind of reflectively listen and validate. And then she got to a point where she was like, so what do I do? And then it's like, okay, so now she wants like some possible options. Like, well, you could do X, you could do Y, you can do Z. But even that, it's like every step along the way, I just intervene as much as they are showing me that they need in that moment. And I would argue that that's true even from the beginning. Like if my 4-year-old's about to run in the street, like then I am needed to jump over and grab them to prevent them from getting run over, right? But then as they get older, the amount of force that's required, you know, just gradually lessens. And if you are honestly only intervening over their autonomy and freedom when it really is necessary, then there's trust. That trust is everything with attachment. That is like how attachment thrives and works and is rewarding and feels good and feels secure. When you have built that trust, you get to cash out all the dividends, you know, once they're older. Yeah. And I mean, I relate to this mom. I think I have experiences where I've had to really hold my own anxiety and fear, you know, okay, my child's climbing up a ladder at 2 years old. Are they showing any fear or any tentative, you know, movements? No. Okay. Then I need to I just need to stand here with my, like, you know, whatever it's called in gymnastics, where I spot, you know, I'm spotting them, but she's doing a good job. So I need to just let her go. You know, there is that internal balance of what's appropriate here. What's my fear? What's her actual, what is she communicating? Like you said, you know, I'm only going to give as much as my child is cueing they need. Yes. Oh gosh. I feel like we could just chat for hours and never run out of things to talk about. Yes. Yeah. Agreed. So the show notes can be found at sagefamily.com/podcast62, where you can also subscribe and get future show notes sent right to your inbox. What, Eden, are your favorite resources for people to dive deeper into this topic of attachment?
Yes, there are quite a few books that are out there that have come out in the past few years about attachment, and those can be good resources. I post a lot of posts on on my Instagram account, Eden Hyder, that have to do with attachment and relationships and parenting. There's a Venn diagram in there. I think it's not yours, but it's I need to get yours. But there's a lot of information there. There's also online courses that I'm working on developing and getting up this summer about doing more of that deeper dive into attachment, and helping people do that work if they can't afford therapy, or just want to kind of go a little bit deeper themselves. Yes.
Nice. And when we're going to link to your Instagram, we're going to link to your podcast. If you want to send me a list of the books that have really resonated with you, I would be happy to include them in the list.
Great.
And I'll link to them so people can read them. I liked the attachment parenting book when my kids were little. Hold On to Your Kids. There was a lot that I felt like was really good and important in that book. And then there were some aspects of it that didn't super resonate with me. I'll link to like my review of the book too, so you guys can see. But I do definitely think it's a worthwhile read.
Awesome.
All right, thank you so much for joining me, Eden. I really appreciate it. I'm going to keep following along on Instagram and listening to your podcast, and hopefully we'll be able to come up with more excuses for us to connect in the future.
I would love that. Thank you so much, Rachel. It's been really fun.